Good evening and welcome back to the AfriCanadian Resource Center. Today is Monday, November 16th, and we welcome you back. And as we always do, tonight we have an interview, an interesting interview, one that is filled with a lot of data. We wanted to talk about some of the studies that are being done in the Black community, and today we have a member of the Montreal Black English-speaking community that we're going to be talking to about how that community is doing during COVID, but also overall discuss some of the challenges that the Black community is facing compared to the rest of the Canadian community. And also I talk about, I ask about how the African Canadian, in the mix of all of this, is doing. And so we're going to have that interview coming up shortly where we talk to a researcher from Montreal. But before we do, as we do every night, we do want to cover a bit of news, let you know what's happening as far as COVID is concerned. Today, we're learning that Ontario reported another 1,487 cases of COVID-19 and pushing the 7-day average to a new high as more regions move into red control level of restrictions. And of course, Toronto confirmed 503 more cases, while 392 were recorded in the Peel region and about 170 in the York region. The number of people with confirmed cases of illness in Ontario rose to 500 across Ontario hospitals, and Toronto joined Peel region in the red alert level, which is the highest short of a full lockdown on this is last weekend on Saturday. Of course, this is saying one more level and we're gonna lock down. And really, if I tell you, everybody that I'm talking to, usually when I come to work, I go through like different places, different shops, talking to people that I usually talk to every morning, whether you get a coffee or drink or whatever. Everybody's just worried about the lockdown because honestly, we are all scared of this virus. We are all concerned about this virus. But I'll tell you, based on what I'm hearing, based on the interviews we're doing, everybody is worried about the lockdown. I can't tell you which one we're most worried about, but I really hope we don't get to that level, because it's just the lockdown is a much difficult space for many of us, especially for people who are struggling socioeconomically as far as how to move around. Yes, there is support. The government has been providing a lot of support, but still, it is not the same when it's a minimum compared to what people can make, even just being outside, being able to meet people, being able to breathe the air, being able to travel, being able to do these things that lockdown does not allow us to do. So we're hoping we don't have to get into the lockdown. Fingers crossed. Another 6 regions such as Durham and Waterloo will move to the orange alert level, and 6 more, including Windsor and Sudbury, will join the yellow alert level according to Ontario. So again, you could see the extreme levels are across the board in Ontario. We don't have the numbers for the rest of Canada today, but what we try to do, obviously, looking at, especially because we do this obviously because we're based in Ontario, but if we can look at other parts of Canada, we will see that so far, Ontario, we are getting hit the worst of all of the provinces across Canada. And we know usually Quebec is not far behind us, and we hope obviously that they're doing better than us, and we also hope to get out of these levels and go back to some level of normalcy, even though we know for sure that it's going to take us a long time to get back to normal. Again, I was talking to some people earlier. We talk about vaccines, like who can, are we even ready to take these vaccines? Are they good for us? Were they not rushed? I saw some reports in New York with the governor of New York talking about how they want to push those vaccines, saying that Black communities have been hit the hardest, and so they are going to use the army to actually implement these steps in terms of providing vaccines. It's very dangerous. I hope Canada does not go that route. But even for New York State, for a governor to suggest such a thing, however way you suggest such a comment, we want to do this as a volunteer thing. We want to volunteer to take these vaccines. We don't think we should involve anybody to provide these levels of vaccines, especially knowing how rushed they are. So again, let's be careful what we say as leaders. We think for Ontario, the approach has been one where everybody is considered, and of course for the Canadian government as well. But again, you never know, sometimes it just takes one decision. And for us, as a population of Canada, yes, we're scared. We all want to get back to normal, but also we should do it responsibly. These vaccines have a side effect, and some of it is going to be long-lasting, 40, 50 years from here. So we should not jump into, yes, we need a vaccine, but let's make sure that they are the right vaccines. So anyways, that's a personal opinion, but it is one that I thought I put out there, because I think everybody's having these conversations and everybody's worried. Of course, some people are waiting. They can't wait to have these vaccines ready. So, you know, a discussion to be had, among ourselves, a discussion for you to have at home. But yeah, let's not rush into these things if we don't have to. Anyways, so that's a bit of the news for today. We're going to bring you our interview with Mr. John Davids from Montreal, a researcher from Montreal. But before we do, let's go to commercial.
A message from the Government of Canada.
Welcome back, and as I promised before the break, we do have an interview with Mr. John Davids, who is a researcher for Black Community Resource Center in Montreal. This is an organization that focuses on Black English-speaking members of the Quebec community, and we talked about a lot of things, including the research they have been doing, trying to understand the need of the members of the Black community who speak English in Quebec. And so, without further ado, please go ahead, take a look at this interview. I'm sure you're gonna love it, because for somebody who, let me maybe lay out the interview. For members of the African community, for members of the Black community, but specifically members of the AfriCanadian community, one of the challenges we have when we're looking at implementing projects, or when we're looking at solving the challenges in our community, one of the biggest challenges we have is a lack of data. Lack of, whether it's research, studies, reports, anything that is done focusing on our people. It's very hard to find. And so, you know, to me, having our conversation we had earlier with John, it's really like, it's like finding a gold mine. And that's what I call these researchers. They are miners, except they are mining data for us. And it's the level of data for somebody who is starting a non-for-profit, it's gold. It's gold, I'll tell you, because when we go and meet these MPs, when we go we meet officials, even for business startups, when we meet with people who are interested in knowing who our projects is going to affect, the first question they ask you is, who are the people? How many people? What's up? You know, like all of these details that are very difficult to really access unless you have the data behind it. And so, bringing you this interview, I'm telling you, it's go beyond the interview. Find out about this organization, the BCRC, and also, you know, reach out to them. And make sure that you reach out to them and find out what they have for your organization, or if you're a leader for your initiative, make sure you reach out. Anyways, without further ado, let's go to the interview.
Inferior. Exhausted.
Dehumanized.
Vulnerable. Insignificant.
I'm stronger than the pain. I can rise above. I can rise above.
All right, John, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate you making the time and being with us here at the AfriCanadian Resource Center. We want to know a lot about you. You're based in Quebec. Tell us what you do and who you're with.
Okay, thank you, Kizito. So my name is John Davids. I'm a project researcher for the Black Community Resource Center. And I'm currently working on a project called Black in Quebec, which is focused on understanding the state and current state of well-being for the English-speaking Black community in Quebec.
So I'm really interested in, obviously, it's the first time I hear of your organization. I'm in Ontario, so the idea of having an organization that focuses on English speaking, because every time we come to Quebec, and I've lived in Quebec, by the way, my first 3 years I was in Montreal. One of the challenges that we have is a lot of the Quebecois or Quebec speaking, French speaking, pretend they don't speak English, even though we know everybody speaks English in Montreal. What is the in terms of when you look at the ratio, I'll say the diversities in Quebec, what is the difference in terms of where the Black community is compared to other communities that speak English in Quebec?
Okay, so in terms of the population of, if I understand correctly, of both the English-speaking and French-speaking Black communities in Quebec, and this is taken from Statistics Canada and their census, which they do every year. So this is the number of people who, again, indicate that they are Black, and when you look at visible minority, they say so, and then also indicate that English or French is their first official language. And by official language, it's between the two. It doesn't mean it's their first language spoken, but just one of the two official languages. So what the census finds is that the population of the Black community overall in Quebec is around 320,000 people as of 2016. Of that, the official language minority, i.e. the English speakers in Quebec, are estimated to be around 57,000 people who indicate that their knowledge of English first. So it's around, I believe, around 5 to 1 ratio.
And when you look at those English speakers of the Black community, maybe you don't have an idea of what the percentage is for the continental African Canadians, but compare the African Canadians that are coming in from the English Anglophone versus Francophone. Do you have any idea which members that are coming the most to Quebec? I would assume the Francophone are the majority, right, of the continental African Canadians who are coming in, the newcomers, first, second generation, and immigrants.
Yeah, coming into Quebec, that's certainly, yeah. Certain countries in Africa, such as Congo, Cote d'Ivoire, even Morocco, French Francophone countries, have a high percentage, increasingly, they have increasing numbers of people coming from those countries. Previously, in decades before, it was mostly Caribbean people from there. So Haiti being a large Francophone country, but increasingly so, we've seen more and more Africans from these Francophone countries coming in to Quebec. I
And
don't really have the number off the top of my head, but from what I understand, it seems to be significantly more than people who speak English first.
okay, and because from what I've seen as of recent, based on the current policy, the current government, and I don't know if you're allowed to go into politics, but the most recent policy was to increase the amount of immigrants that come in from different, especially Black communities from Africa, from South America. Have you seen anything on the Quebec side that shows you that there's going to be an increased number of Africans or Black people coming into Canada the same way the Asian community comes in or the Europeans come into Canada?
I haven't particularly seen any sort of report or study to indicate so. Doesn't mean it's not necessarily out there. Just so far in my research, I've yet to come across anything to really that really suggests so. But again,
Yeah.
it could be limited in terms of what I've seen.
And maybe that should lead me to my question, my next question. Look, based on your research, the research you've been doing, what stands out to you when you look at Black communities in Quebec?
Well, when we look specifically at the English-speaking Black community, one aspect of this community is that we often the term double minority is used. So we're not just a visible racialized minority, but also a linguistic one. And so there are some unique kind of aspects about the English-speaking Black community that are kind of different from the French-speaking Black community. At the same time, I often say that when it comes to the two communities, there seems to be also a lot more in common than we have different as well. So a lot of issues are shared by both linguistic communities. And again, we need to understand the English-speaking Black community. This is just a language group that we mentioned because of how people answer the census in terms of their first official language spoken in Canada. So amongst this community, it's already very diverse groups within it. There's a lot of people who speak a third language that isn't English or French. And the subgroups within this community might also have, certain challenges or specifics, be in specific situations that are quite distinct from the rest of the community.
Okay.
Another, sorry. Yeah.
So
I was
go
just
ahead.
going to say another aspect of about the community that's kind of interesting in Quebec is how data is collected regarding the community, regarding different groups across Quebec. So, for instance, while the census asks for visible minority status, and you can indicate that you're Black, and you can indicate your country of origin as well. With the statistics collected in Quebec, they don't really ask about visible minority status. So this information I can share with you about the situation of English-speaking Blacks or Blacks in Quebec is mostly informed, or at least in large part informed, by federal data from the federal government, from Statistics Canada, as opposed to data from Statistics Quebec, who don't really ask the question of one's visible minority status.
Any reason why they've chosen not to ask that question?
Well, we need to understand that, first of all, for a long time, people have been advocating for more race-based data to be collected and to kind of change this policy in Quebec, especially in regards to in light of the COVID pandemic and the weeks shortly after March. But people were advocating before. The government, or at least Dr. Arruda, said in early May, I believe, that given all the public pressure to do so, that they would begin to collect it, or at least consider to begin to collect it. But shortly afterwards, they decided not to. And in some of the written correspondence I've had with different members of ministries across the government, so specifically the Ministry for Health and Social Services in Quebec, from what I understand, they are kind of against collecting this kind of data, and the reasoning they give is that it could be misused or mishandled. and used kind of negatively against specific groups, or it could be used to discriminate against specific groups of people if we collect race-based data. So it's kind of the norm in Quebec that we don't have a lot of answers to these questions when it comes to the situation facing racialized minorities. Yeah, so it's not completely unique to Quebec. France also has the same policy, or a similar one at least.
Yeah.
But that is the situation we're facing.
And what is the position of the BCRC as far as knowing these numbers? Do you feel like obviously I would assume we need to know, or we want to know these different diverse groups, and because I think for us here in Ontario, one of the challenges we have, even looking at the individual communities, like for me, being from the Rwandan community, and other people, a lot of people, I've spoken to somebody from the Liberian community. A lot of the challenges that we have is knowing like how many people we have in the country. We have no idea. We are always estimating. And so I guess, what position is the BCRC hold? Do we wish for these numbers, or for these numbers to be for these kind of questions to be asked in surveys, or do we think individual communities, like if you're from the Rwandan community like I am, if you're from the African community like we are, do we think those communities should be looking for to create their own survey and then maybe find a way to have the capacity to do so? What do you think?
Yeah, so I think it's an excellent question. So I think it speaks to why this project was created in the first place, which was to collect data about the community, to give it back to community organizations who could then use it to do their planning for the next year and their programming. So what, I'm calling for more data to be collected on racialized communities, specifically because not doing so can put them at risk of being rendered sort of invisible. So if we didn't collect this kind of data, we wouldn't really understand the specific situations facing specific types of communities. In response to the reasoning as to why the province chooses not to collect it, or at least the concern that this kind of data could be used to discriminate against specific groups, my position is that I believe that racialized minority groups, whether they be community organizations or whatnot, people from racialized minorities should really have a say and have a seat at the decision-making table when it comes to planning how this data is going to be collected, analyzed, and used. So if we're there from day one and helping with the organizing and planning of it, I think that would greatly help with reducing the risk of its misuse. It's
Absolutely.
misuse to target specific groups. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm wondering now, as a part of maybe advocating to make sure that these individual racialized groups are brought to the table, even in enforcing or at least advocating for the Quebec government to include these questions. Is there any works? Because obviously they've done it before, and Quebec, the government chose not to do it, even though they promised to do it, as you just said, around March. Is there any further push for them to do this in the future?
Yeah, so I think there certainly is, and it's important not to kind of let go of the gas, so to speak. I'll talk about kind of my personal understanding of this and my opinion. I can't really speak to the BCRC as a whole, but what I would say is that by rendering visible minority groups invisible, by not collecting important data about them, it also serves as a form of discrimination in and of itself. So I feel that this is an issue that, in the wider context of race relations, not just in Canada but also in the U.S., because they affect us a lot here too. This question of collecting race-based data is one of the issues, alongside policing, alongside all these other aspects, discrimination in the workplace, unemployment, so on. Right?
Yeah.
So for me, it's one avenue that I want to address. So in terms of what's being said to address it, right? And the kind of what moves are being made. Well, since May, advocacy still continues to collect this kind of data. People are still trying to push the government to do so, but some people or some organizations, including my project, are also trying to collect this data for ourselves as well. In other words, if the province isn't going to do it, we can try to do our best to kind of get an idea of what's happening in the community. So there's that. I would say ultimately, for the government to kind of change its position, it would take a lot more advocacy, a lot more civic engagement, a lot more speaking and lobbying and pressuring policymakers, calling up your local representatives and government, and making it an issue for them.
And I'll just add to what you're saying. I think what makes it a discrimination is that when you are ahead, other communities, and I think we are not wrong to say that a lot of our communities, Black communities, are always left behind within Canada, within North America, and any other community that's ahead of us would prefer that we don't even know where we stand, right? We don't know specifically what does the Black community look like, what does the African community within the Black community look like, what does the Rwandan, I'm going back to Rwanda because I'm Rwandan, what does all these individual communities, what are their socioeconomic status and all of that? Because if we're behind and we don't know, they continue to be ahead, because the fact that we don't know means we are not going to address these issues individually. And that makes it very difficult for us to ever come out of the hole that we find ourselves in. So I definitely agree with you that not knowing, and especially for the government that can actually do it easily by adding a couple of questions in there, is a form of discrimination, because you're simply saying, oh, it's okay, we're all the same, there is nothing to see here. But no, there is definitely levels. If you look at all of our communities, whether it's Haiti or, let's say my community, we went through a genocide. Our members in any community, wherever we go, we're going to have that disadvantage because we're going through that trauma. And if we don't specifically focus on that and you just bring us into a pool of Canadians, you're pretty much saying we're good. We're just as good as everybody. But we know we went through a trauma. We have a trauma to deal with. And if you don't address that, not only does it affect us in the future, it affects the country. It affects the Canadian in terms of the well-being of the country itself. Because now you're bringing people now and you're not taking care of the trauma that they went through.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. So it's also important to keep in mind that I think, this is also throughout this summer, as I'm talking about the provincial situation, this is also something that the federal government has also began to discuss and try to address, so to speak. So there have been, a few changes and a bit signs of progress, so to speak, since March in regards to the collection of race-based data. And the federal government, for instance, has begun collecting that in the labor force survey that it does every month. So all I'm saying is that this is part of kind of a wider discussion that's happening now. I think now is the time for organizing and advocacy, if ever there was a time. And hopefully it continues to develop. But just to keep in mind, again, I said the federal and I said the provincial before. So we need to also understand how I guess who's in charge of what sector. In Canada, health is usually overseen by the province, right? And so it becomes a provincial issue in that sense. But and the federal government has also its limited ability or at least willingness to actually step into some of these sectors, if you will, to kind of to make a change. They really leave it up to the province to kind of work out. So I just wanted to mention that as well.
And yes, and I think you're right. For example, when you think of policy or policing, not policing, but the police enforcement and all of that, that's local. That's on a local level. So everything, and which goes back into my next question that I was going to ask you about some of the programs that your organization provides, including civic engagements, obviously educating people about cultural awareness. Maybe tell us a little bit more about how the research that you're correcting connects with the actual services that the organization provides in the community?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I want to give you a really good example. Um, as I mentioned, my project started at the end of February, so it's fairly new, so to speak. And our hope is that we can continue year after year, kind of updating the information we collect, or putting out more surveys, and so on. A really good example, though, of what you just asked is that in their research so far, we've found, as you said, that there's a lot of disparities within the English-speaking Black community, or the Black community overall in Quebec, specifically with the English-speaking Black community, though, as well. And I wanted to mention that when I say these disparities, I'm talking about differences in income. I'm talking about unemployment rates. I'm talking about percentages of people of the group that lives in poverty or below the low income cutoff. So, a number of socioeconomic measurements. And one thing we're doing to address that and to try and correct it is collaborating with another organization. Well, they're based in Huntington in Quebec, but their name is CDEC. And what we're trying to do is match English-speaking Black job seekers with employers who recognize that this is a problem and that they want to take some actions to try and address. So we're creating this job bank, so to speak, which will be in our organization and or partner organizations as well, i.e., other organizations in the Black community who also want to add this to their programming or partake in this. And the idea of that is to try and reach young Black skilled people who are having trouble finding employment in Quebec, and match them with companies who acknowledge that this is a long-standing issue and can try to do something to address it as best as they can.
No, that's amazing. And I know, again, I mentioned I've lived in Quebec. I haven't really thought about it until now, that when you look at a lot of Africans who come from English-speaking countries like Ghana, Nigeria, you're right. The level of employment that a lot of them have, it's either like these like small shops. You really don't find them into like these regular centers, like government places. It's always people who are within the government places are people who are coming from the French-speaking background. And so when you look at that, also you're right in terms of when you go to communities, like when I was living in I used to live in the Westbrook, which is close to Concordia University, and I remember vividly, like it was like the only community, if you would say that was like, you would say that was doing well, but even then, compared to the rest of the neighborhoods around it, we were still sort of on a lower end as far as the economic levels. What is the Quebec or the Montreal city, the Quebec government doing? Obviously, this is probably part of what you're finding out through your research, but has the Quebec government realized that issue, the disparities that you're talking about, or will it require, once again, individual organizations like yours and these other communities to take the steps and advocate for this challenge within Quebec? Is there anything that the government have done to create, to at least bridge that gap?
Yeah, well, yeah, I would name a few things. So there is, for instance, I'll just give you an example of the Secretariat for Relations with English-Speaking Quebecers. So this is a government department, and they're one of the funders for our project as well. So that in itself is just, for me, like an example of the government also recognizing that it needs to kind of be on the same page with in this case, the English minority in Quebec, and conduct research and help fund research regarding this community, try to increase access for this community, and so on. There's the province kind of putting funds towards that, and that's also how we're getting our funding, right? So
Yeah.
I think there is kind of steps in the right direction, so to speak, being taken, at least in trying to understand the situations facing different groups. But I think it could be taken much further for sure. But hopefully that happens sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Before you add the next point, is this funding also connected to the anti-Black racism initiative, or is this completely just Quebec independently? I'm talking about the national anti-Black racism initiative that was taken by the federal government.
For my project specifically, it's we're being funded from, as I said, the secretariat for the province, but federally it's through Canadian Heritage.
Oh, okay.
So when it comes to specifically like the anti-Black racism funding and so on, it's not tied to my project specifically.
Oh, okay. Okay, I just wanted to be sure, because I was gonna sort of look at because I know there is an initiative. That was gonna be my next question. The government has been pushing since 2018, and obviously I think we have about a decade where they have focused funding to focus on combating anti-Black racism. This has helped a lot of organizations in the Black community gain funding that they couldn't access before. Actually, our organization was also a recipient of a grant, not specifically tied to the anti-Black racism, like yourself, from the Canadian Heritage. But we are seeing other organizations in Toronto and Ontario receiving funds that they never were able to access before because of this program. So I'm wondering, and when because there is another program that I noticed that you have, it's called Project Walk. And you were talking about sort of understanding the challenges of young people in Quebec. Maybe talk about a little bit about that. And I know you're not leading the project, but it's within your organization. What is that project about, and how does that lead to maybe helping this initiative of combating racism in Canada, in this case in Quebec?
Sure. So Project Woke, and I should mention it kind of ended around the same time that my project was getting started, so around spring of this year. But essentially, the idea of Project Woke is to get youth to think about, kind of to start thinking politically and start asking the question of policies that affect them, and trying to give them a voice to kind of do some research, have discussions with other youth in regards to the barriers to entry for in regards to like how they fit into society and so on. So the idea was to give them a voice, to get them to talk with each other, and to get them to speak to the barriers of entry, and then also formulate policy recommendations, which then they could pass on and kind of advocate for policy change when given the chance. So that it was quite a successful program. I've held workshops following the project, specifically on anti-racism. So in August of this year, Project Woke and Black in Quebec, we got together and we did 2 workshops. They hosted the first, we hosted the second, and the subject was on systemic racism in Canada, or actually in Quebec. So they kind of spoke to how oftentimes they feel voiceless. They spoke basically about their experiences of exclusion, and how the project kind of helped them to speak with each other, meet other people who kind of feel the same way, and start talking about policy change that they could recommend. When it comes to feelings of exclusion, it's not just like in a socioeconomic sense, or trouble with getting jobs, but many of these people, being young, were also in the classroom at the time, and we're also talking about lack of learning about African history, Black history, not just history in Africa, but also contributions of Africans into Canadian history. There's still that's still something that's very much under talked about. So that was essentially that's my best overview basically of the project and what it sought to do. Yeah, I'll share with you some links as well if you want.
Please do. By the way, so just to tell you, in the coming, hopefully next year, I'm personally I'm undertaking a project that's going to actually look at the early Africans into the Americas and the kind of work that we contributed. And I'm looking at it from two angles: the ones that came after colonization, sorry, not after colonization, during slavery, but the one that came before slavery. I'm really focused on looking at that journey, where we ended up, what we did here. And so if you have anything in that area within Quebec or east of Canada, I would really appreciate it. Because when I explore, what we're looking to do is to really encourage and inspire African Canadians and Black Canadians and Americans to think and create like we used to before colonization, before slavery. And to do that is we want to take our people back and show them what we did that was great. And so if there is anything on that that you might have, or anything that is to that, I would really appreciate that, because it's really hard to find information on that.
It is, and I would say there's just two things I'd like to mention. The first one is I don't know if you've heard of a man named Matthew DaCosta. Have you heard the name Matt?
I've heard of it, but please explain a bit more.
He's one of the earliest explorers who came to Canada alongside Samuel Champlain. So Samuel Champlain is the person who, is often, he's one of the early founders of Quebec in Canada from France. And he's a name that, a lot of children hear about in their history, but they don't hear about Matthew DaCosta. Matthew DaCosta was a Black man. He spoke several languages, including Mi'kmaq, and several people believe that he might have even come to Canada before Champlain, or in previous expeditions, and that's why they say he spoke Mi'kmaq. That's the only way.
He's able to speak like an indigenous language. By the way, just we covered him a few weeks ago, so I was like, I've heard that name before. I just wanted to make sure where I had it from. But yeah, we did an interview with an indigenous.
So that's the start, right? That's one of the earliest explorers who came to Canada, not as a slave, but as someone who was working with the Europeans. And I really appreciate what you're saying, because so much of the narrative, even my whole life, has been essentially Africans only came to the Americas via slavery, and that essentially, when it comes to African history before colonialism and the slave trade,
we were jumping in trees. That's what we were doing.
Exactly. Whatever the narrative is. But the truth is that the history is so rich, and people are I'm learning myself these days as well. There's a man named Akala in the UK who I watched some of his seminars, and he talks about African history before colonialism. Much evidence suggesting that Africans had come to the Americas well before Europeans came to Africa. There's plenty of kingdoms in Africa that existed before Europeans arrived, that some have written,
Mali, Timbuktu, I can go on and on, like Muna Matapa, like it's just again. I'm following that journey all the way to the Americas, and like I said, I appreciate those key points, and if you can share that individual as well, because I follow the person that introduced me to this understanding was Dr. Ivan Versatamo. I don't know if you've heard of him.
No, I haven't.
Please, man, look up Dr. Ivan Versatamo. He has since passed away, but he did a lot of research on Africans in Europe from 700 to 1492. This is when the Africans fell, the Moors, who we all know as Moors. What we are not told is Moors were Africans. So the time that they were in Europe, but also their existence in the Americas. So he has a book called They Came Before Columbus, and that book shows you clearly that a lot of what was done in the Americas, we're talking about the pyramids built in Mexico, Honduras, and all of those places. Part of that was enhanced with the Africans, because you see the army, the heads, all Africans. And so, and then there's a lot of other things, of course, languages and everything like that, that you look at, you're like, nah, definitely we were here way before Columbus. The question is, what did we do in what capacity? But we were here. We were here along with the indigenous people. And so that was the introduction, but I want to actually explore also the Canadian side of things. And of course, Atlantic Canada is the center of that. We don't know much. We know there is Black people in Atlantic Canada that were here before, but the narrative again is always, oh, they came here as free slaves or free people from America, when we don't focus on who were here before all of that. And I don't know if these Canadians even know that themselves. And that's what we're trying to explore and see, just to see who we were, and that way we can actually see where we're trying to go. And it goes back to the point you raised about really understanding who these young people are, who we are as Black people, whether it's in Quebec or in Canada.
Yeah, yeah, and this is it's like a new book that I'm opening, actually, even in my own life, to really understand, to try and understand African history that goes beyond, the 1600s. It's fascinating because you're learning such new things that have such big implications when it comes to identity, and people who, let's say Black people who were born and have lived in Canada and the Americas for generations. It's a way to kind of get them in touch with their history, with their people, with their identity. So I really support, keeping this study expanding, not just going, but expanding. And again, just to say that it's not really part of the mainstream story that we hear, kind of, when it comes to history in the Americas. And quite frankly, the study of history overall, I find, lacks enough information or knowledge about histories of tribal people or indigenous peoples in different places. It's not just Africans, but also indigenous people in the Americas or here in Canada. There's still a long way to go to kind of get our history out there and to learn the story.
And as we are
see
told,
the connection as well.
As we are told, history is always written by victors, and we definitely, there was a victor, somebody who won, as far as if you look far back. A majority of that has been European, so most of the history favors Europeans, and I would say it's not fair, but that's how it is. And now we have to retell that history, look at the records, because I think looking at history as it's written, as it's taught in universities, in whatever different levels of studies, it's just not the actual records of what took place in the past. And we need to go back and evaluate and look at actually what did take place. And I think it's our responsibility as individuals, as organizations, and I really appreciate the work that you're putting in, doing this research, and at least understanding first, what's the current issue, what's the current condition, before we can even think about the solutions, whether it's through the study of history. I really appreciate the work that you're doing with BCRC. Maybe my next question for you is looking at, obviously you're doing this project during COVID, right? What are the challenges you're facing? And I'm thinking maybe in outreach, reaching out to people. Is it a challenge, or was it an opportunity for you to do this kind of project during COVID-19?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So it's a bit of both. It was mostly challenging, but there are a few kind of positive, or I could say opportunities that arose because of it. The big negative is that obviously we weren't able to interact with people face to face, and I think that changes kind of the quality of discussion we could have, and a lot of the people who were using the center before didn't have access to it, right? And hopefully we hope to kind of bring back some capacity of access, if restrictions can change soon. At the same time, though, it forced us to kind of get creative, and it forced us to kind of innovate ways we could, engage with people in a way that they liked, and it kind of put some challenges to the project for us to have to like try and address. So switching to Zoom, for instance, doing everything on Zoom, it's not easy. It's not easy to, if this is the new reality, to kind of do this forever. But I've also made really good connections doing so, and worked on really on some successful projects with people who I've met on Zoom, never met in real life. So, it kind of presents a challenge that we have to kind of step up and try to address. And again, this is not just us, it's the whole world essentially learning how to adapt to the situation. And so we didn't want to put too much, pressure or like expectation per se, just to say, let's try our best we can to make the project function and to keep it going, regardless, in spite of the situation, So I think, again, it's, for the most part, of course, it's been a negative situation, ordeal the past 6-7 months, and God forbid, but it might continue for who knows how much longer. But at the same time, we had to kind of adapt, and we're trying to do that every day that we speak.
We don't have a choice. You just mentioned how you've made a lot of connections on Zoom. I literally was talking to somebody recently who is now a close friend of mine, and we have yet to meet. we met on Zoom, and in my head I thought we've met already, and I was like, wait, we haven't met. So it's incredible. It's a new world where you actually, for the last 6 months, you can easily think you've met people because you've been talking to them for too long, and then you wake up, you're like, wait, we've been through COVID the whole time. We haven't actually met. But we need to figure out, and I'm asking that question because I feel like everybody has been able to, if you look at a lot of organizations and businesses that are in operation right now, a lot of them have seen the positive side to it too. Because obviously for non-for-profits, it's the fact that now they can access funding. Obviously, a lot of the funding is to respond to the actual emergency that's in place. But also it's given them the ability to do more, to engage the community more. And then for the businesses that, now we're looking at small businesses that are no longer having to fight with the giants, because most people are online now. It's almost like equal. Obviously, the giants still have the money to advertise and everything like that. But for the Black community, and I don't know if you're getting this sense, so I'm going to ask you the question, and hopefully you can have a bit of data. Have you, Black community, this is the English speaking minority in Quebec, have you seen anything that has given them an advantage or a disadvantage during COVID that you can maybe talk about?
Sure. So, okay, when it comes to, and you're speaking about the English-speaking Black community specifically,
the English-speaking,
right?
yes, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So, first of all, I think the approach we take when we ask the question of health, we look at the social determinants of health. So that is to say that one socioeconomic situation has a significant impact on their health, and health can have a significant impact on their health and health outcomes. So in a pandemic such as COVID, we hear that, and it's not really, it's not even really a secret, and it's not even something that isn't said a lot. It's fairly often said that, the poor suffer the most, or the poor are at most risk. People who are already vulnerable or already marginalized are at higher risk anyways, when the virus started. And the data that I have in front of me suggests that visible minority groups, and specifically the Black population, has been infected and is suffering from COVID in various ways, various measurements, whether it's infection rate or rate of death or symptoms or people who passed away. The data I have suggests that the Black community is suffering quite disproportionately in regards to COVID, just in terms of the health sense. Then there's the economic situation, which hasn't been very, very positive at all. So we already had big differences in employment rate, in rate living below poverty before COVID, and in the income and so on. While I can't speak to income and poverty, I do know that when it comes to unemployment rate, starting from July, which is when they started collecting race-based data federally, it's called the Labor Force Survey. They do it every month. But starting from July, we could see that visible minority groups had significantly higher unemployment rate compared to the total population or non-visible minority groups. When I say non-visible minority groups, it essentially includes people who aren't a visible minority, but also those who aren't indigenous. So we have to keep that in mind. They're not counted as part of the group. So essentially, it's everyone's unemployment rate increased, and following March and April shutdown, we began to talk about reopening slowly and the recovery. So we're currently in this recovery, so to speak, which also had another new shutdown. In this whole time, all I'm saying is that the Black community across Canada has had significantly higher unemployment rate than a non-visible minority community. And when we consider the kinds of industries that a lot of people in the Black community work in, that is to say healthcare, but also, and especially for young people, retail and working in food services. And there's especially high proportion of the Black community in those industries. And there's a specific risk associated with both of those sectors. Then we can see that the Black community is also kind of felt the brunt of the virus disproportionately.
Yeah.
Now,
And
when I talk about the last thing I just wanted to say is when I talk about unemployment rate, what we know, the latest numbers we have nationally are that it's around 11.7% unemployment for visible minorities in Canada, when it's around 6.7% for non-visible minorities. So it's almost double. But
wow.
This proportion has been kind of constant over time. It was constant well before. It was apparent.
I guess
well
it wasn't
before
as extreme as it is now, but it was still. Was it always double as far as the numbers? Let's say maybe because what's usually the unemployment rate for the visible minority during good economy?
Well, give or take, it was kind of double. Okay, give or take.
Oh,
It was maybe a little bit over being double or a little bit under, but yes, around double is a good way to kind of just picture it. So when it comes to like unemployment rate for English-speaking Black community, and the latest data we have is from the census. So again, 2016, it was around 13.5%, if memory serves correct, whereas it's around 6 to 7% for non-visible minority groups. For the French speakers, it's not far off. It's also almost around double than what it is for the French speaking non-visible minority group. Yeah.
Wow.
So there's always been it's always been as far as the data goes back that I have, it goes back to 2001, 2006 for a few things, sometimes a bit earlier for a few other things, but essentially around, give or take, double the rate of unemployment for the Black community.
We still have the only thing I can say based on this interview, Mr. John. And by the way, I love this. I love these sort of when I get any data. One of the challenges we had as an organization starting is finding data. So even mining data, which is obviously what you're an expert on that, not knowing where to begin, but the fact that you're able to sort of have that, and obviously it's not enough. It's never enough for our community, but at least we have a place to start. So I would say this: I want to be reaching out to you. We definitely need that collaboration because we need organizations like yours that's doing this kind of work that has more of an understanding of what this data is by looking at it. And we definitely will be looking for ways to access the information if you don't mind. But looking forward for your organization and looking at where you are and where we want to go as a Black community, especially obviously with the focus of the Black-speaking communities in Quebec. Where do we go from here? Where do you think we go from here based on the research you're looking at, based on the data you're looking at?
Based on the research, based on the data I'm looking at, but I'm saying that as a researcher, but I'll also kind of speak personally here in terms of my opinion as a Black person, where what I hope to see happen. I think that first of all, I think that there's a lot of work to do in terms of bringing together different Black communities across the country and in the province as well. And at the moment, I really love and admire a lot of the work that people are doing, because a lot of the issues kind of cross over, or a lot of the priorities are shared, um, at the same time, there is distinctions. But what I would really like to see is people in the Black community coming together more, and pushing and demanding to kind of consolidate a space that is for the whole community. It's not just at the moment. There's various community organizations. We're all seeking funding from year to year. There's a lot of uncertainty for people, and that's on top of the COVID context. What I really would like to see is an institution solidified and consolidated for the community. That for me is a need. And then just on top of that, I know, and it's not to disrespect anyone or to kind of say that work isn't being done enough, because there's too many people who in our community are being kind of overworked and stretched out to kind of advocate for so many things, and going out of their way, underpaid, so on. But I really wanted to just say that, it's not about, for me, like asking the state or the province to kind of understand us or accommodate, but these are kind of demands that people should be demands, not asks, that people should be making to their governments, because it's the obligation of governments to take care and understand and respect their people who they serve. So so that's all I'm calling for, just a tone of not asking but demanding that we have these rights met. So that's it.
And I do agree
Sorry.
with you 100%. Part of a lot of that is I'm learning right now. A lot of successful Black communities or African communities that I've spoken to, one of the things that they all tell you is, when we approach funders, whether it's through third party or a connection between the government and ourselves, like Red Cross, Community Foundation, United Way, everybody's emphasizing that when you go to them, don't necessarily follow the guidelines that they have in place, because those guidelines do not apply to us as Black members of the Canadian society. We have to also push for them to create different guidelines for us. And so that goes to what you're saying, making sure that we are demanding, we're not just always asking. And I think a lot of our people are shy to say, you know what, this is our, it's your duty to serve us. It's your duty to provide these means. It's not, you're not doing us a favor. If anything, you're doing yourself a favor as a government to provide these resources to the people. And now, the other challenge I'll say that we have, for your other point about having one institution, is time. Because I think for an institution to function correctly, there needs to be, for example, the African, I know here in Toronto, there is an individual that's working to create an African hub. That would be like a hub or an institution for the continental Africans. But I think that would also operate better if there was that institution that you're talking about that was above, that's like an umbrella for the Black community overall in Canada that everybody else can tap into. But to get to that level, I think it's going to require us time. Again, I'm patient. I don't mind if my children are going to benefit from this instead of me, as long as we're moving towards that place, I guess. I'll be fine with it. As long as you are doing this, which I really appreciate, and then we can be able to continue what we are doing in creating something new, something different, something that shows that we're creating change, I think will be good for, I will live with it. I don't know about you, but I will live with knowing that my children are going to benefit from what we're trying to do.
Yeah, and it's not to, again, take anything away from, because there's so many organizations, and they're just growing and growing and growing, and they're all doing a lot of great work. I think if you're doing community work, if you're engaging with people in the community, if you're feeding the hungry, if you're helping children who need help, so on, that's, it's an A+ already. So that's great. I'm just talking about now letting other people know, and kind of getting on the same page as a community. That's the challenge, and we're trying to work with what we have so far. So hopefully one day we can see this institution.
Absolutely, man. As you can see, we could go on forever. I know you have more information. There's a lot of questions that I had for you that we didn't get to. All I know is we are definitely going to reach out as an organization. We want to learn more about your resources. We're going to find a way to reach to get those resources to the people, whether in Quebec or even across Canada, because I think some of the information you have is specific for Black Canadians who are speaking English in Quebec, but also for all of us across Canada, we can definitely benefit from that. Please let our audience know how they can access some of your work, the website, and all of this important information as far as the social media is concerned.
Sure, sure. So I'll just let them know that well, we have our website, but we could also reach us firstly from our Facebook. So it's facebook.com/Black in Quebec. I would also just like to let your viewers know, and I sent you this poster before, but we're currently conducting a study for Black youth aged 18 to 35 regarding the state of well-being. Regarding their psychosocial health during the COVID pandemic, and also how it relates to Black Lives Matter movement. And it's a paid study, and it's 2 surveys, and you get paid $20 to take them both. So if anyone is interested, you can email the goalstudy@gmail.com. And again, it's meant for Black youth to get an understanding of the impact COVID-19 has had on this particular community. So there's that, the Facebook and the study, and there's also a number of other ways. We have an Instagram page, a YouTube page, BCRC Montreal. We have our BCRC Montreal website as well, which I suggest everyone can come see. You'll see all the programs that we're doing, and we also have quite a lot of things planned for 2021. So yeah, those are some of the ways.
Amazing, man. I'll be the first person to go back on there and tap into all of these resources that you have. And definitely we want to share this, and hopefully you can get as many young people to participate in that study. Again, I think everything that you're doing as an organization is there is no data. That's one thing I've learned about our community. We need as much data as we can about our people here. And so we encourage you, and we wish you all of the best in mining this data for us, and we hope to learn more about what you find, obviously, towards the end of your study right now. And thank you so much once again for joining us, man. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Kizito. It was really nice to meet you, man. I really appreciate having this discussion with you. I really appreciate the work you're doing with Rwanda and Canadian Healing Center, and I hope that we can stay in touch for sure moving forward, and keep on building on the conversation we had today.
Absolutely, we'll do, David, and have a wonderful evening.
Okay, take care. You too, Kizito. Thank you.
Appreciate it.